Commander Harlan Voss slammed the briefing folder onto the table, hard enough to make every officer in the room flinch. "I don't care what the paperwork says," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm not sending my men into a combat zone with a girl covering their backs." He didn't look at Megan when he said it. He didn't need to. 20 years of rank had taught him that some people weren't worth the courtesy of eye contact. She was a rookie. She was a woman. In his mind, that was already 2 strikes too many. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow Megan's story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The fluorescent lights inside the Joint Special Operations Briefing Room at Bagram Airfield buzzed like trapped insects, and Petty Officer Second Class Megan Carter sat perfectly still in the back row and told herself she was not going to let anyone in this room see her hands shake. She was 28 years old. She had been shooting since she was 9. She had qualified on every weapon system the Navy put in front of her. She had broken the previous record for long-range accuracy in her SEAL Sniper certification course by 11 percentage points. The instructor who scored her final evaluation had stared at the paper for a long time before signing it, not because he doubted the numbers, but because he had never seen numbers like those from any one man or woman in 31 years of teaching. She knew all of that. She had lived all of that. And none of it mattered right now because Commander Harlan Voss was standing at the front of the room with a mission briefing in his hand and an expression on his face that made it clear he had already decided she wasn't part of it. "Let's talk about the operation structure," Voss said, pulling up a satellite image on the wall display. The image showed a compound carved into the rock face of a mountain in northern Afghanistan, roughly 60 kilometers from the Pakistani border. Black Ridge Security, private military organization. 17 confirmed operators on site with intel suggesting 3 to 4 additional support personnel. Our target is Dr. Rachel Morgan, American intelligence specialist reported missing 11 days ago, while embedded with a field analysis team investigating illegal weapons transfers in the region. He tapped the image. "We go in Thursday night. 4-man Assault Element 1 Overwatch position." Chief Petty Officer Ryan Mitchell, who had been sitting to Megan's left, leaned forward slightly. Mitchell was 41, built like a piece of furniture that had survived several moves and had been running special operations missions in this part of the world since Megan was in middle school. He studied the compound image with the calm attention of someone reading a menu at a restaurant he'd been to many times before. "What's the terrain situation on the North Ridge?" he asked. "Difficult," Voss said. "Exposed approach, minimal natural cover, high elevation. Which is why I want an experienced Overwatch element." He paused, and in that pause Megan felt something shift in the air. "Which is why I'm reassigning Petty Officer Carter to logistics coordination for this operation and bringing in Chief Hansen to fill the sniper role." The room went quiet in a specific way that Megan recognized. It was the quiet of people deciding whether to say something. She said something. "Sir." Her voice came out flat and controlled. "Can I ask the basis for that reassignment?" Voss looked at her for the first time. His expression wasn't hostile. It was something worse than hostile. It was patient, the way a man is patient with a child who doesn't yet understand how the world works. "Operational experience," he said. "Chief Hansen has run 17 Overwatch assignments in comparable terrain. You've run 0. With respect, Sir Chief Hansen is currently recovering from a knee surgery that happened 3 weeks ago. I reviewed his medical clearance this morning. He's been cleared for administrative duty only." Silence. Mitchell turned his head slowly to look at her, and she could not tell from his expression whether he was impressed or alarmed. Voss set the briefing folder down on the table. He did it carefully with the controlled movements of a man who was recalibrating. "Where did you see Hansen's medical file?" "I didn't access his file. He told me himself, sir, 2 days ago in the mess hall. He was talking about his physical therapy appointments." "Carter, I'm not trying to challenge your decision, sir. I'm trying to make sure the Overwatch position is filled by someone who can physically perform it. The North Ridge approach you're describing involves approximately 400 meters of rough terrain climbing before reaching an effective firing position. I ran that route in training 3 months ago. I know what it requires." Voss looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening behind his eyes, a calculation she could almost watch in real time, the question of whether the inconvenience of arguing with her outweighed the inconvenience of being wrong in front of his team. He picked the folder back up. You'll be evaluated on site. Mitchell, you have final authority on the Overwatch element during mission execution. If you determine Carter isn't performing to standard, you pull her and call it in. Understood, Mitchell said. Megan said, "Thank you, sir." Voss didn't respond to that. He turned back to the wall display and moved on to the next section of the briefing, and Megan unclenched her jaw and breathed slowly through her nose and reminded herself that the mission was Thursday, and she had 2 days to make sure she was ready. What she didn't do was celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate yet. She had won the right to be evaluated. That was all. In this world, that was exactly where she'd been her entire career. Earning the right to be evaluated. Proving again that she deserved to be in the room she was already sitting in. She was tired of it. But she was not finished. Ryan Mitchell found her in the equipment room at 2100 that evening, breaking down her rifle with the methodical focus of someone who had done it so many times. The movements had become a form of thinking. He stood in the doorway for a moment without saying anything, watching her work. She didn't look up. "You going to tell me I made a mistake back there?" "No," he said, walking in and pulling up a stool. "I was going to ask where you learned to do that." "Do what?" "Stay completely calm while someone publicly dismisses you, and then respond without any emotion in your voice at all." She set down the bolt carrier group and picked up the cleaning cloth. "My father was a Marine. He had very specific ideas about how emotional responses were useful and when they weren't. He died 6 years ago. Fallujah second deployment." Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He died doing the thing he believed in. He would have hated being pitied for it." She resumed cleaning. "He used to say that anger was just energy looking for a place to go. You could throw it at the wrong thing and waste it, or you could save it for when it mattered." Mitchell nodded slowly. "So the thing back there in the briefing room. That was just information. I gave him information. I don't have the luxury of making it personal." He studied her for a while. "You know what most people do when they get passed over for something they earned? They make noise," she said. "And then whoever's in charge has 2 problems. The injustice and the person making noise about it. I only want him to have 1 problem. The injustice." Mitchell picked up the barrel she'd set aside, looked down it briefly out of habit, and placed it back down. "Your qualification scores were the highest in your class." "I know. Top 3 in the program in 5 years." "I know." "Voss hasn't looked at them." She stopped moving. For just a second her hands were still, and then she started working again. "I know that too." "He will," Mitchell said. "After Thursday, he will look at every number you've ever produced." "I'm not doing this so he'll look at my numbers." "Then why?" She looked up at him then, and something in her eyes was so direct and unguarded that it seemed almost out of place on her face, which had been professionally composed the entire evening. "Because Dr. Rachel Morgan is somewhere in that compound, and she's been there for 11 days, and nobody is coming for her except us. That's why." Mitchell held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he nodded, once stood up and replaced the stool against the wall. "Be ready at 0400. We're doing a full terrain rehearsal on the South Ridge before the briefing tomorrow. If you can keep up with me, you stay on the mission. And if I can't," he was already at the door, "you'll keep up." She kept up. The terrain rehearsal lasted 5 hours and covered ground that would have ended the participation of anyone who was only moderately fit. Mitchell moved fast, deliberately fast, testing her without acknowledging he was testing her. Choosing routes that required upper body strength and balance, and the ability to think while breathing hard. He said almost nothing for the first 2 hours. She said nothing back. By the time they reached the ridge elevation, he was using as a proxy for the actual Overwatch position. Her legs were burning, and her hands were cold, and she was completely focused, and completely fine. Mitchell set up his spotting scope, and looked out over the training range below. "Call the wind." She was already reading it. 8 knots, slight variation right to left, gusting inconsistent. I'd account for a half-value correction at distance. Distance to the primary target zone, 1,140 meters. You're sure? I range found it on the approach. There's a drainage gully at 980 that gives a false reading if you're not watching for it. He looked at her. You range found during the approach. I range found everything on the approach. Why? Because if something goes wrong and I lose my equipment, I need to know my distances from memory. She looked through her own scope, adjusting for the light. My father taught me that. He said the equipment is a tool. Your brain is the weapon. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly. Something softened in it without becoming warm. What are your concerns about the mission? The drone coverage, she said immediately. The satellite imagery shows 3 surveillance drone launch points inside the compound perimeter. If they're running active patrols, they'll cover the North Ridge approach every 14 to 18 minutes, depending on battery cycle. Our window for movement is narrow. And if they're on a different cycle, then we adjust on the ground. But I'd want to know the drone models before we insert. I'll get you the intelligence report. She looked at him. You have access to the full report. I have access to most things, he said simply. The question is whether the person I'm sharing it with knows what to do with the information. He collapsed his spotting scope. Come on, we're going back down and doing it again. She blinked. We're doing the entire approach again. Different route, and faster. He was already moving. You want to be on this mission, Carter. You need to know this kind of terrain the way you know your own rifle. The mountain isn't just a place you're fighting. The mountain is your partner. Either you understand it, or it gets you killed. She followed him. Her legs screamed at her, and she ignored them completely. 2 days before the mission, something happened that Megan hadn't anticipated. The other operators started watching her. Not with hostility, not exactly, but with the particular focused attention that men who are very good at dangerous things give to other people when they're trying to figure out exactly how dangerous those people are. She noticed it in the equipment bay when she was running diagnostics on her Barrett M82. She noticed it in the dining facility when she sat alone and reviewed the intelligence maps. She noticed it most clearly when Sergeant First Class Derek Okafor, the assault team leader, walked up to her table at dinner on Wednesday evening and sat down across from her without being invited. Okafor was 36, Nigerian American, the kind of quiet that came from genuine confidence rather than shyness. He had a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye toward his ear that he never explained and nobody asked about. He placed his tray on the table and started eating, and for almost a full minute, neither of them said anything. Then he said, Mitchell told me you caught the drone coverage pattern in the satellite imagery. Yes. He said you flagged it before the intelligence section did. The intel summary mentioned the drone launch points but didn't calculate the patrol window. I just did the math. Okafor nodded, chewing deliberately. You know what our biggest risk is on this operation. She considered the question seriously. Speed at the point of entry. If the assault element is in the compound more than 12 minutes before the target is secured, the enemy has time to reposition, and we lose the tactical advantage of surprise. He looked at her. That's exactly right. You said that without hesitating. I've thought about the operation a lot. Most people think about their specific role, he said. You thought about the whole thing. If my Overwatch position fails, the whole thing fails. I have to understand what I'm supporting in order to support it correctly. Okafor ate a few more bites. Then he said, I pushed back on Voss when he tried to remove you. I want you to know that. She looked up from her food. Why? Because Mitchell vouched for you. And Mitchell doesn't vouch for people. She held his gaze. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't miss. He picked up his tray and left, and Megan sat alone for a moment, feeling something shift quietly in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like the careful acknowledgement that the people who mattered on this team were starting to pay attention to the right things. Voss was a wall she'd have to climb over. Okafor and Mitchell were starting to feel like something else. She went back to her maps. Thursday came with the kind of cold that felt intentional, the air biting at the back of the throat, the kind of night that made everything feel high stakes in a physical bodily way. The C-17 lifted out of Bagram at 2300, and Megan sat in the jump seat nearest the rear with her rifle case between her knees and her eyes closed, running the mission sequence in her mind for what felt like the 100th time. Insertion at 01Y5 local. 12-minute approach to the ridge. Overwatch position established by 0147. Assault element moves at 0200 on confirmation of visual contact. Target extraction projected at 0217. Exfiltration window opens at 0230. 47 minutes start to finish. 47 minutes in which approximately 20 armed hostile operators would be trying to kill everyone she was responsible for covering. She opened her eyes. Across the hold, the four-man assault element sat together, checking their gear with the practiced efficiency of people doing something they'd done many times. Okafor caught her eye briefly and gave her a small nod. She returned it. Mitchell sat beside her silent. He had been silent for most of the flight, which she'd learned was not his version of ignoring her, but his version of concentration. He thought ahead quietly, methodically, the way she did. It was the thing they had in common that neither of them had needed to say out loud. "You sleep?" he asked without opening his eyes. "No." "Good. Sleeping before an operation is for people who aren't paying attention." He paused. "Or people who are so experienced they don't need to think anymore." "Which one are you?" "Neither tonight. This one's got edges I don't like." She looked at him. "The intelligence report. The intelligence report is fine. The intelligence report is what's bothering me." He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of the aircraft hold. "The information we have on Black Ridge is too clean. Satellite imagery, patrol patterns, communication, intercepts, personnel count. Everything handed to us in a package. You think it's manufactured? I think in my 22 years of doing this, information is never that clean unless someone wants you to have it." She felt the cold, that had nothing to do with the air temperature, settle somewhere between her shoulder blades. "You think it's a trap? I think we need to be ready for it to be a trap." He turned his head and looked at her directly. "Which means I need you sharp, not good. Sharp. There's a difference." "Tell me the difference." "Good is hitting the target you're given. Sharp is seeing the target they didn't tell you about." He held her gaze. "If this goes wrong, you're the most important person on this mission. Not Okafor. Not me. You. Because if the ground element gets pinned down, you are the only thing standing between them and a situation they cannot survive." She absorbed that. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because in 2 hours it'll be too late to tell you, and you needed to hear it when you had time to let it settle." He closed his eyes again. "The team doesn't trust you yet. You know that." "I know." "You have one way to change it. Not by explaining yourself. Not by pointing to your scores. The only thing that changes it is what you do when it matters." "I understand." "Good." A pause. "Carter." "Yes." "I'm glad you're here." She looked at him. He still had his eyes closed. She didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say that would be adequate, and she had learned from her father that silence was sometimes the most honest response. But she felt his words land somewhere deep and specific in the part of her that had been quietly, privately exhausted from years of fighting for the right to stand in rooms she was already qualified for, and she let herself feel it for exactly 3 seconds before she filed it away. She looked back down at the mission maps. She thought about Dr. Rachel Morgan, 11 days in a compound in the mountains, 11 days of not knowing whether anyone was coming. Someone was coming. She was coming. The aircraft began its descent, and the cold deepened, and Megan Carter checked her rifle one final time, and breathed and waited. The jump was clean. The approach was not. Mitchell's concern about the intelligence report began to feel like prescience the moment their feet hit the ground because the mountain was different from the imagery. Not dramatically different. Not in ways that would have changed the planning, but in small specific ways that meant someone with less preparation would have been surprised. The drone patrol window was not 14 to 18 minutes as Megan had calculated. It was 11. She caught it on the first pass, warned Mitchell with a hand signal, and they held position in the shadow of a rock outcropping for 4 minutes that felt very much longer. while the surveillance drone moved overhead, its camera sweeping slowly across the terrain they'd been crossing 12 seconds earlier. Mitchell looked at her in the darkness after it passed. She couldn't see his expression clearly, but she felt his approval like a change in air pressure. They moved. By the time they reached the Overwatch Ridge, Megan's body was cold, and her mind was hot, and she was in the particular mental state she'd learned to recognize as her best self, the version that existed only in extreme circumstances, absolutely present, absolutely clear. She built her position with the speed of someone who had rehearsed it, used the natural formations of the rock to create stability and concealment, and had her scope on the compound within 4 minutes of arrival. Overwatch established, she breathed into the comms. I have visual on the compound, counting 11 visible operators. Okafor's voice came back low and steady. Copy that. We're at the base of the approach, ready on your call. She scanned. The compound was arranged around a central structure, with 2 elevated defensive positions on the east and west corners, each manned by a single operator, with what appeared to be a crew-served weapon. The movement patterns of the ground operators were irregular, which was either good or bad. Either they were relaxed, or they were deliberately unpredictable. Movement patterns are uneven, she reported quietly. I'm not reading standard patrol rotation. Either they're casual, or they're irregular by design. Preference, Mitchell said beside her. Neither. I want to watch for another 2 minutes before we commit. She watched. The second minute of watching was when she saw it. 3 operators moving together, deliberately heading not toward the perimeter where a casual patrol would go, but toward a position on the eastern side of the compound that the satellite imagery had showed as an empty storage structure. They weren't patrolling. They were taking positions. And positions meant they were expecting something. Mitchell, she said very quietly. I see it. That's not patrol behavior. No, it's not. A beat of silence on the comms. Then Okafor's voice, talk to me, Overwatch. She made the decision in the space between one breath and the next. The way her father had told her, real decisions were always made, not in the agonizing deliberation people imagined, but in one clear moment when the right choice became undeniable. Sergeant Okafor, I believe the compound is aware of the approach. I'm seeing pre-positioning behavior on the eastern sector that is inconsistent with standard security rotation. I am recommending we hold before entry. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds, but in operational time, it was a very long 4 seconds. Then Okafor said, how confident, high. Another second of silence. Mitchell, confirm. I confirm Carter's assessment. It looks staged. Copy. A pause. We hold. Carter, keep watching. Tell me what they're doing. She kept watching, and in the next 4 minutes, she watched the carefully constructed trap unfold in the darkness below her, invisible to everyone who wasn't looking at it from exactly the angle she was looking at it from, and she understood that Mitchell had been right. The intelligence had been too clean. Because this was not a rescue mission. This was a killing field. And she was the only person who could see it clearly enough to change what was about to happen. She adjusted her scope, steadied her breathing, and began calculating. 4 minutes. That was how long Megan had been watching the compound before she understood that everyone down there was about to die. Not might die. Not could die. Would die unless she changed something in the next 60 seconds. She kept her voice low and completely even when she pressed the comms. Sergeant Okafor, I have 3 operators repositioning to the eastern storage structure. They are not on patrol. They are setting an ambush line. If your element moves through that approach corridor in the next 4 minutes, you will walk directly into a kill zone. The silence on the other end lasted long enough to make her chest tighten. Then Okafor said, how many total you counting? She scanned. 17 visible. I'm missing 3. Possibly inside the main structure, possibly in positions I don't have line of sight on. 20 total. That matches the intelligence estimate. The intelligence estimate was wrong about everything else, she said. I'd planned for it being wrong about that too. Mitchell beside her was already on a second frequency, relaying a contact report back to the operations center at Bagram. His voice was calm in the practiced way of someone who had delivered bad news in the field so many times it had become a professional skill. Operations, this is Overwatch Actual. We have indicators of a compromised insertion. Requesting permission to abort and extract. The voice that came back from operations was clipped and institutional. Overwatch Actual confirm. Do you have visual confirmation of hostile awareness of your presence? Negative confirmed, but behavioral indicators are strong. My Overwatch element is recommending hold. Stand by. Stand by. 2 words that in a normal office meant wait a moment, and in a combat zone meant the people making decisions were far away from the consequences of those decisions. Megan had heard those 2 words more times than she could count. She had never learned to be comfortable with them. She kept scanning. And then the mountain told her what she needed to know. A light. Single flash, red filtered from the north face of the ridge approximately 200 meters to her right. It lasted less than a second. Someone signaling. Someone who was not on her team, not on Okafor's team, and not inside the compound. Someone was on the ridge with them. Mitchell. She didn't raise her voice. She said his name the way you say something when you need the other person to understand immediately that the situation has changed. North face, 200 meters right. Single red flash approximately 8 seconds ago. He swung his spotting scope. 3 seconds. 5. I don't have a visual. They've gone still, but they were there. You're sure? I'm sure. I was already on this comms. Operations abort recommendation is now a contact report. We have an unknown element on the ridgeline. This is not a compromised insertion. This is a deliberate trap. Repeat, this is a deliberate trap. The voice from operations went quiet for 3 full seconds, which was long enough for Megan to scan the ridge, lose the position, find it again, and confirm what her instincts had already told her. Whoever had been there was good. They were using the terrain the way someone used it when they had practiced using it low, still patient. Professional. Operations copies. Assault element is ordered to hold position. Overwatch, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Okafor's voice came on immediately. Copy, hold. My element is at the base of the southern approach. We are static. What's the situation? Megan answered before Mitchell could, because she had the scope, and she was the one seeing it. You have a second hostile element on the ridgeline to the north. Unknown size. They were using a signal light, which means they're coordinating with the compound. You were supposed to hit the compound, get pinned down in the ambush from the eastern sector, and then get taken from behind by the ridge element. 3-point trap. A pause from Okafor. How long have they been up there? Long enough to be comfortable. They knew when we were coming. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. This was the silence of 4 highly trained men at the base of a mountain, rearranging everything they thought they knew about the next 2 hours. Okafor said, "Someone burned us." "Yes," Megan said, "from inside." That's what 3-point ambushes with advanced positioning look like. You don't set that up in response to an insertion. You set it up before one. Another silence. Mitchell was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read in the low light, something between assessment and something quieter. "Carter," Okafor said, "what do you need to make this survivable?" She had been doing the math since the moment she saw the red light. "I need 5 minutes, and I need your element to hold exactly where you are. Do not move, do not use lights, do not make noise. The ridge element is watching the approach corridor. As long as you're outside it, they can't confirm your location." 5 minutes for what? To find exactly where they are. And then, she looked through her scope at the compound at the patient killers, who had arranged this carefully, who had set up this killing field, and then sat inside it, and waited for Americans to walk into it. She thought about Dr. Rachel Morgan, 11 days in that compound, and she thought about the people at Bagram who had handed them a clean intelligence package, and she felt something cold settle into the center of her chest. That was not fear and was not anger, but was something more useful than either of those things. And then, she said, "We changed the math." She started hunting. The ridge element was good. She gave them that. They were patient and they were still, and they had chosen a position that gave them a long field of fire down the approach corridor, while keeping them tucked into the natural shadow of the rock formation, in a way that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them with a quality optic and the knowledge that they were there. But they had used that signal light. And signal lights, no matter how brief, left an impression on the eye. Megan had spent 9 years training her visual memory to hold on to exactly those kinds of impressions, to lock the position of a single photon of reflected light against a dark background and triangulate it against known reference points. She found them in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. "I have the ridge element," she breathed. 3 operators, primary shooter, spotter, and security. They're at the base of the second rock formation on the north face, approximately 230 meters from my position. "Can you take them?" Mitchell asked. She ran the calculation. Wind elevation angle, the specific problem of engaging a target that was at nearly the same elevation she was, which changed the ballistic solution in ways that could fool someone who didn't account for it carefully. "Yes, but if I engage, the compound knows we're here. The ambush in the eastern sector will activate." "So we have a sequencing problem," Mitchell said. "We have a sequencing problem," she agreed. "I need Okafor's element ready to move the moment I fire. The second that ridge team goes down, the compound is going to go loud. Okafor needs to be inside their perimeter before they have time to reorganize." "That's a 60-second window at best," Mitchell said. 50, she corrected. "The operators in the eastern sector are already staged. The moment they hear shooting on the ridge, they're going to move. Okafor's element needs to be moving faster than that." Mitchell got on the comms. "Sergeant Okafor, new plan. Carter is going to engage the ridge element on my command. The moment you hear that shot, your element moves. You have 50 seconds to breach before the eastern sector activates." A beat of silence. "Mitchell," Okafor said carefully. "That means she takes a shot that starts the entire engagement without any of us in position yet." "That's correct. And she does it from a position the compound will immediately try to identify and neutralize." "Also correct." Another pause. "Carter, you understand what you're signing up for?" "I understand," she said. "Once you pull that trigger, every hostile in that compound is going to be looking for you." "I know. And you're comfortable with that." She thought of something Mitchell had said on the aircraft. "You are the most important person on this mission." Not because she was irreplaceable, because she was the variable they hadn't planned for. The one piece on the board the enemy hadn't counted. She thought of her father, who had believed that the clearest thinking happened in the moment when everything was at stake, when there was no room for noise or ego or self-consciousness, only the pure question of what needed to be done. "Sergeant Okafor," she said, "I've been the person nobody planned for my entire career. I'm used to it." 3 seconds of silence. Then Okafor said, "On your call, Mitchell." Mitchell looked at her. She was already on the first target. Primary shooter, 230 meters, wind reading consistent with the last 4 minutes, elevation compensated. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips, and she breathed deliberately, slowing it, not because fear was making it fast, but because precision required a specific relationship between breath and heartbeat, and she had learned to create that relationship on command. "And, ready," she said. "Call it," Mitchell said. She breathed out. At the bottom of that breath, in the stillness between exhale and the next inhale, she squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the mountain dark, and everything happened at once. The primary shooter on the north ridge went down, and she was already moving to the second target before the sound of the shot had finished echoing off the rock faces. The spotter was turning, reaching for his weapon, trying to understand what direction the shot had come from, and she was already there, already past the calculation, already past the hesitation. The second shot, 9 seconds after the first. In her earpiece, she heard Okafor moving. The security element on the ridge was the problem. He was better than the other two. He rolled, found cover, didn't expose himself looking for her. He went flat and went still, and she lost him for 3 full seconds that felt like considerably longer. "Compound is activating," Mitchell said, his voice sharp. "Eastern sector is moving." "I know. Where's the third man on the ridge?" "Can't find him." She pushed the scope, left-right, forcing herself not to rush, because rushing was how you missed, and missing right now was not an option that existed. She found him. He had moved 8 meters from the original position, which was smart, except that in moving, he'd had to cross a section of rock with a slightly different color than the surrounding surface, and the difference had registered in her peripheral vision as exactly the kind of motion that the human eye was designed to detect, even when the mind was focused elsewhere. She breathed. She fired. Ridge element is down, she said. Okafor, you have 25 seconds, Mitchell said. What happened in the next 90 seconds? Megan could only partially see from her position. She could hear it. The sound of a combat breach controlled fast professional. The short, sharp sounds of a team that knew exactly what it was doing. She kept her scope on the compound, watching the eastern sector, watching the ambush operators who had staged themselves so carefully, rushing now to reorient their plan. Broken the third piece of their trap missing, trying to figure out what to respond to and from which direction. That confusion was Okafor's doorway. He walked through it. Breach successful, came the voice over comms, and Megan felt something release in her chest, some tightly wound tension she hadn't fully acknowledged she was holding. We're inside. Compound is chaotic. Carter, we've got multiple hostiles trying to exit the eastern side. I need eyes. I have them, she said, and she did. 4 operators eastern exit, 2 armed, 2 appear to be escorting someone. Someone, female, moving under her own power, dark clothing. That's Morgan. That is our target. A sharp exhale. They're trying to extract her before we reach her. Distance from extraction route to your current position. 40 meters, maybe less. They're faster than you. They'll reach the vehicle before you do. Options. She already had the calculation running. The 2 armed escorts were the priority. Without them, the extraction collapsed. The problem was angle. The eastern exit was partially obscured by a structure she didn't have clear line of sight over, which meant her shooting solution was narrow. She had approximately a 2-meter window in which she could engage as the operators moved through it. Carter, Okafor said, and there was an urgency in his voice that he'd been keeping controlled for the last 15 minutes, but was now coming through. Talk to me. I have a solution. It's tight. I need them to move at normal pace. If they start running before they clear that structure, I lose the window. How do I keep them from running? She thought for exactly 1 second. Make noise from the west. Not fire. Noise. Something that sounds like your element moving on the wrong side. Make them look left. A beat. Then she heard it, the deliberate, controlled sound of movement from the western corridor. Just enough. Just the right quality of sound to make trained operators turn their heads involuntarily toward a potential threat. The escorts turned left. They cleared the structure. She fired twice, 3 seconds apart. Both shots landing exactly where she needed them, and the 2 escorts went down, and Dr. Rachel Morgan stumbled and stopped, and stood in the middle of the compound's eastern corridor, with her hands raised and her face turned toward the sky, and in Megan's scope, she looked like someone who had spent 11 days not knowing whether anyone was coming and had just received her answer. Escorts are down, Megan said. Target is stationary, eastern corridor. Visual confirmed, Okafor said, and his voice had dropped the urgency, replaced by the deliberate calm of a man crossing the last distance. We have her. We have Morgan. She's alive. In the brief silence that followed, Mitchell did something unexpected. He reached over and put his hand briefly on Megan's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. But the mission was not over. That was the thing about combat. The moment you let yourself breathe was almost always the moment the situation reminded you that breathing was still a privilege that needed to be earned. Overwatch. I have 2 vehicles activating on the northern perimeter, came the voice of Corporal James Wren, the youngest member of the assault element. His voice tight with the specific stress of someone who had just seen something change the situation. They're coming fast, armed, minimum 4 personnel each. 8 more. 8 more operators, which meant the intelligence estimate of 20 had been wrong, not by 1 or 2, but by 8, which was not an intelligence failure, that was an intelligence deception. Whoever had burned them had given them a number designed to make the operation seem feasible while holding a second wave in reserve. Okafor, Mitchell said immediately. You need to move, right now. Northern vehicles are 2 minutes out, maybe less. We're moving. Carter, can you stop those vehicles? She was already looking. Northern perimeter, 2 vehicles fast, coming down a track that converged on the compound's main entrance. The track was the key. At 2 points along that track, The natural terrain created bottlenecks where a single disabled vehicle would block everything behind it. She needed the front vehicle to stop at one of those points. "I can stop one," she said, "but not both. If the second vehicle peels off the track, I lose it." "Stop the one you can," Mitchell said. "Buy us the time we need." She waited. Watched the lead vehicle accelerating down the track, its headlights bouncing in the dark. She calculated the intercept point, the place where the track narrowed, where one vehicle sideways across it would be an impassable obstacle. She needed the vehicle at that specific point, moving at its current speed, which meant she needed to fire before it felt right to fire. She fired. The shot went through the engine block. The vehicle lost power, instantly coasting the last 10 meters directly into the bottleneck, coming to rest exactly where she needed it. Broadside across the track, the second vehicle slamming on its brakes 30 meters behind it. "Lead vehicle is stopped," she said. "You have 60 seconds before the second vehicle finds a way around." "60 seconds is enough," Okafor said. "We're at the extraction point. Mitchell, call the bird." Mitchell was already on the extraction frequency. "Whiskey 7, this is Overwatch Actual. Primary extraction requested. LZ is hot, repeat. LZ is hot. Request immediate." The helicopter pilot's voice came back steady, as someone reading a grocery list. "Overwatch Actual, Whiskey 7 copies. 3 minutes to your position. Have your element ready." 3 minutes. In a hot extraction, 3 minutes was a geological era. Megan stayed on the scope, watching the second hostile vehicle work its way around the disabled lead, watching operators debark and begin moving toward the compound on foot, watching the whole situation teeter on the edge of becoming something nobody could manage. "Okafor," she said, "I have 6 personnel on foot moving from the second vehicle. They are going to reach the compound perimeter in approximately 90 seconds. We need 2 more minutes at the LZ. I can give you 90 seconds. Carter. I can give you 90 seconds, she repeated. Not a boast, a number. She had done the math. 6 operators moving fast, predictable approach vectors, because the terrain channeled them, and she had the elevation and the time. After that, it's going to get complicated. 90 seconds, Okafor said. Make it work. She made it work. She couldn't account for every detail of those 90 seconds later when she tried to reconstruct them. What she remembered was the focus, the absolute crystal clarity of operating at the edge of her capability. Each shot, a separate, complete problem that she solved and discarded and moved to the next one. No hesitation between them. No room for anything except the next calculation. She remembered Mitchell beside her calling adjustments without being asked, reading the terrain and feeding her information in the clipped shorthand they had developed over the last 3 days. His voice steady. Exactly what she needed, a second mind running parallel to hers. She remembered the sound of the helicopter. She remembered Okafor's voice on the comms. LZ is secure. Morgan is aboard. We are lifting. She remembered the moment she lowered her rifle and looked at her hands, which were steady, which surprised her slightly, not because she doubted herself, but because the level of intensity she had been operating at should have left some physical residue, and it hadn't. And she held her hands in front of her in the dark for a moment and breathed. Overwatch, Okafor said you need extraction. We're 2 minutes behind you, Mitchell said. Carter, on your feet. We move now. She was already moving. They came off the ridge faster than they'd gone up it, the urgency of the situation replacing the careful deliberation of the approach. Mitchell in front, setting a pace that required everything she had, the mountain beneath their feet, treacherous in the dark, and neither of them faltering. Behind them at the compound, she could hear the controlled chaos of an operation that had gone sideways for the people who had arranged it, the sound of plans coming apart. When the helicopter lifted them off the ridge 7 minutes later, Megan sat against the bulkhead with her rifle across her knees and her eyes closed. Dr. Rachel Morgan was on the opposite side of the hold, wrapped in an emergency blanket, holding a water bottle with both hands. She looked at Megan across the narrow space with an expression that was complicated and exhausted, and something that was not quite gratitude, but was deeper than gratitude. Megan looked back at her. Morgan said, "You were the Overwatch." "Yes." "How old are you?" 28. Morgan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You pulled me out of there. The whole team pulled you out. You know what I mean." Megan did know. She didn't argue the point. She looked at the woman across from her, 11 days in that compound, and she thought about the intelligence package that had been too clean, and the three-point ambush that had been set up before they arrived, and the second wave of operators who weren't in any intelligence estimate, and she thought that the mission wasn't really over. It was just entering a different phase. Okafor appeared at the forward compartment hatch and made his way back through the hold. He stopped in front of Megan. He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of a man who is reorganizing a significant portion of what he believed, and then he held out his hand. She shook it. 11 contacts, he said. You made 11 contacts in approximately 9 minutes. Something like that. In degraded visibility from a compromised position, with a wind variable that Mitchell tells me was shifting every 3 minutes. She didn't say anything. Carter, he said, I pushed back on Voss for you before this mission because Mitchell vouched for you. I need you to know that if I'd known then what I know now, I wouldn't have waited for Mitchell to say anything. He paused. I would have said it first. She looked up at him. She didn't have a response that was adequate. She had learned over years of operating in spaces where she was underestimated that the moments of acknowledgement didn't always feel the way she'd imagined they would. Sometimes they were quiet. Sometimes they came in helicopter holds at altitude with the sound of rotors drowning out everything else. Sometimes the people who delivered them looked tired and serious rather than celebratory, because the thing they were acknowledging had happened in the middle of something dangerous and the danger had not yet fully passed. Thank you, she said. He nodded and moved toward the front of the hold. Megan looked back at Megan, who had been watching the exchange with eyes that took in more than they let out. Mitchell dropped into the seat beside her. He was silent for a moment, which was his way. Then he said, You know what the Ridge element had that our intelligence didn't mention? Tell me. Communication equipment. Encrypted military-grade, not civilian market. That kind of hardware requires specific sourcing. He looked at her steadily. Black Ridge isn't buying it from a weapons market in Peshawar. She felt the cold settle back, in the same cold she'd felt on the ridge when she understood the trap was real. Someone supplying them. Someone with access to military logistics channels, he said, which is a narrow list. Which is why the intelligence package was clean. Someone on that list wanted us to walk into this without knowing what was waiting. Yes. And now that we didn't die, she said, slowly working through it. That person knows the operation failed. They know we extracted Morgan. They know she's alive and talking to us. Mitchell held her gaze. Which means this is not the end of something. She looked at Rachel Morgan, who was staring at the floor of the helicopter hold with the focused inward expression of a woman who had spent 11 days in a compound run by people trying to kill her and was now running through whatever she knew and what it meant. Megan had a feeling Morgan understood exactly what the next hours were going to involve. Debriefings. Questions. The specific machinery of an investigation that started when an operation failed to go the way someone had arranged it to fail. She had a feeling she was going to be part of that machinery. Not as the rookie. Not as the person no one planned for. As the person who had changed the math on a mountain in northern Afghanistan, while everyone else was still figuring out what the math was. The helicopter flew on through the dark, and Megan Carter said nothing else, and thought about everything, and waited for what was coming next. They landed at Bagram at 0347, and the base was waiting for them in the specific way that bases wait when something has gone wrong, and the people in charge haven't decided yet how wrong it was. There were lights. There were vehicles. There were men in uniforms, standing in configurations that meant something official was about to happen. Megan saw it the moment the helicopter touched down, read it the way she read terrain, the way she read wind, the way she read everything, as information, as a pattern, as a thing that told her what was coming before it arrived. Mitchell saw it too. She knew because he went very still beside her in the last 10 seconds before the rotors slowed. That's a lot of brass for 0347, he said quietly. Yes, she said. That's not a welcome home. That's a containment. She looked at Rachel Morgan, who had not moved from her position against the bulkhead since the exchange with Okafor. Morgan was watching the lights through the helicopter's small window, with the focused, measuring expression of someone who already knew what the lights meant. Her hands were wrapped around the empty water bottle. Her knuckles were not white. Her breathing was controlled. 11 days in a hostile compound, and the woman was still thinking clearly. Megan found that remarkable and filed it away. Okafor came through from the forward compartment as the rotor noise dropped to something they could talk over. "Listen to me," he said, addressing the team. "Whatever happens in the next 30 minutes, nobody talks to anyone without me present. Not command staff, not intelligence liaison, not anyone. You have that right, and you exercise it. Understood?" Murmurs of confirmation from the team. He looked at Megan last. Something in his expression said the instruction applied to her most specifically. "Understood," she said. The hatch opened. Commander Harlan Voss was the first face she saw. He was standing 12 feet from the helicopter, with two officers she didn't recognize flanking him, and an expression on his face that she couldn't immediately categorize. Not anger, not relief, not anything as straightforward as those. Something calculated. Something that was already working out what the next several hours needed to produce. He looked at the team as they came down. He looked at Morgan. And then he looked at Megan, and for a single second, less than that, half a second, something crossed his face that she had not seen there before. Something that might have been recognition. Then it was gone, and he was speaking, and what he said was not what she expected. "Good work out there," he said, addressing the group. "Debrief in 20 minutes. Alpha conference room." That was it. No questions. No confrontation. No acknowledgement of the compromised intelligence. The 3-point ambush, the second wave that wasn't in any estimate. Just good work and 20 minutes. Okafor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Megan noticed it because she had learned to notice Okafor's tells. Mitchell fell into step beside her as they moved toward the operations building. He spoke without looking at her, his voice low under the noise of the base at active operation tempo. "He's not going to mention the intelligence failure in that room." "I know," she said. "He's going to present this as a successful extraction with minor complications. And if someone asks about the ambush setup, operational uncertainty, fluid intelligence, standard language for when the truth is inconvenient." He glanced at her sideways. "You have a choice to make before you walk into that room." "I know that too." Carter. "Mitchell, I know." She kept walking. "My father used to say that the difference between a complaint and testimony is whether you can prove it. I can't prove anything yet. What I have is what I saw, and what I saw is enough to ask the right questions." She paused at the building entrance. The right questions in the right room. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to push this." Someone compromised that mission. Dr. Morgan was in that compound for 11 days, while someone with access to military logistics channels was supplying Black Ridge with encrypted hardware. That's not operational uncertainty. That's a crime. She held the door. "Yes, I'm going to push it." Something in Mitchell's expression settled into a kind of careful resolve. "Then I'm pushing it with you." The debrief room was already half full when they arrived. Intelligence liaison officers Megan didn't recognize. A JAG representative in the corner who was there for reasons that were not yet clear. Okafor's team arranged along one wall, still in their operational kit, radiating the contained energy of men who had just come off a hot extraction and hadn't had time to decompress. And at the head of the table, Voss with a folder in front of him, and the easy practiced authority of a man who had run many rooms like this one. Rachel Morgan was not present. She had been taken to the medical facility the moment they landed, which was standard procedure, and also Megan thought convenient for whoever didn't want her talking in this particular room before the narrative was established. Voss opened the debrief with a summary that was technically accurate and almost completely dishonest. He described the extraction of Dr. Morgan as a success achieved under difficult but manageable conditions. He described the ambush indicators as a fluid operational environment. He described the intelligence package as solid foundational work that required real-time adaptation on the ground, which was the kind of sentence that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. He did not mention the ridge element. He did not mention the second-wave vehicles. He did not mention the encrypted communications hardware. Megan watched the intelligence liaison officers across the table taking notes and wondered which of them had seen the mission package before it went out. Voss reached the end of his summary and looked around the table. Questions. Okafor said, "Yes, sir. I have several." Something very subtle shifted in Voss's posture. "Go ahead, Sergeant." The ridge element. 3 operators armed pre-positioned on the north face with signal equipment. They were coordinating with the compound before our insertion. How does the intelligence assessment account for them? A pause. Controlled, practiced, but a pause. Pre-insertion reconnaissance identified that position as unoccupied. The ridge element appears to have moved into position during our final approach window. In 11 minutes, Okafor said. Excuse me, the drone patrol interval was 11 minutes, sir, which is the window between our last satellite confirmation of that position and our insertion. 3 operators moving into a pre-selected firing position with coordinated signal equipment in 11 minutes in the dark on difficult terrain. He let the silence work for him. That's not opportunistic repositioning. That's a rehearsed plan. Voss looked at him steadily. Your point, Sergeant. My point is that they were ready for us. Specifically, not generally. They had a prearranged ambush configuration, waiting for exactly the approach vector we used at exactly the insertion time we used. He paused. That information didn't come from watching us land. It came from somewhere else. The room was very quiet. The JAG officer in the corner had stopped writing and was listening. Voss said, "That's a serious allegation." "I haven't made an allegation, sir. I've described what I observed." Okafor's voice was still perfectly controlled. "The allegation is yours to make or not make once you've reviewed the evidence." "And what evidence do you have?" Mitchell spoke then from his seat beside Megan. "The communications equipment recovered from the ridge element. I photographed it before we extracted. Encrypted military-grade specific hardware that is not available on any civilian or gray market. I can have those photographs on your desk in 10 minutes. The sourcing on that equipment will tell you exactly which supply channel it came through." The silence had a different texture now. Heavier. The kind of silence that formed when a room understood that the conversation had moved into territory that was going to have consequences. The intelligence liaison officer across the table, a woman, Megan's age, maybe younger, who had been taking careful notes since the beginning, put her pen down. It was a small gesture. Megan noticed it. Voss looked at Mitchell. "I'll review the photographs. I'll have them sent to your office." "Good." He looked around the table. "Anything else?" Megan said. "Dr. Morgan, sir. When will she be available for debrief?" "She's in medical. We'll debrief her when she's cleared." She appeared physically stable on extraction. Tired, dehydrated, but ambulatory and fully alert. "I'd like to request that her debrief be prioritized." She held his gaze. Given that she was in that compound for 11 days, she likely has information that is time-sensitive. Voss looked at her with an expression that was flat and professional and gave nothing away. "Your recommendation is noted, Petty Officer Carter. Medical will determine her availability." He closed his folder. He stood. The debrief was over in 22 minutes. Megan had the distinct feeling that it had lasted exactly as long as Voss had wanted it to last, covered exactly the territory he had intended it to cover, and concluded before anything irreversible had been said by the wrong person. She was still thinking about that when Okafor caught her in the corridor outside. "Walk with me," he said. They walked, away from the operations building toward the equipment bays, far enough from anything official that the conversation was just 2 people talking in the dark. Wren and 2 other members of the assault team peeled off as they went, leaving just Okafor and Megan and the heavy pre-dawn air. "You held back in there," he said. "I said what I could prove. There's more you want to say." She looked at him. "The JAG officer. She was in that room for a reason. Someone requested legal representation at a mission debrief at 0400 in the morning. That's not standard procedure. Someone knew the debrief was going to involve information that needed a legal witness. Okafor's expression was still the way it got when he was processing something significant. Which means someone requested her presence before the debrief. Before we landed, before the debrief was even scheduled. She paused. Voss knew the debrief was going to be complicated before he walked into that room. Okafor stopped walking. He turned to face her fully, and in the low light, his expression was something she hadn't seen from him before. Not the focused operational calm, or the measured authority, but something rawer. The expression of a man who has served for a long time in a system he trusted, and is confronting the possibility that the trust was not entirely earned. "Carter," he said. "What exactly are you saying?" She said it carefully. "I'm saying that Commander Voss received our mission package, identified the ambush configuration the enemy was preparing, and did not abort the mission or modify the approach. I'm saying the intelligence report was prepared to make the operation look viable while concealing information that would have caused us to stand down. And I'm saying that the person who prepared that report or approved it knew exactly what Black Ridge was planning because they helped Black Ridge plan it." The silence between them lasted a long time. "That's an accusation of deliberate betrayal," he said. "Yes." "Against a ranking officer?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of moment where Megan could almost see the weight of it pressing on him. The accumulation of 20 years in uniform, the loyalty to institutions, the understanding of what it cost to say this kind of thing out loud. She had thought through all of those costs herself in the helicopter on the way back. She had weighed them against 11 days for Rachel Morgan. Against the 3 operators on the ridge who had been prepared for exactly what she and Mitchell were doing. Against the second wave that nobody had mentioned in any briefing. Against the look on Voss's face when he had first seen them come off the helicopter. The look she had catalogued and set aside because it was not evidence, just impression. But impressions she had learned were often the first form that truth took before anyone was ready to say it plainly. "What do you need from me?" Okafor said. She hadn't expected it to be that simple. She had prepared for pushback, for caution, for the institutional friction that met every accusation against people with rank. The directness of his question surprised her enough that for a moment she didn't answer. Then she said, "I need access to Dr. Morgan before the official debrief. Before whoever is managing this situation has time to shape what she says. She was in that compound for 11 days. She knows things. And she is either the key to proving what happened, or she is part of it. And I need to know which one before someone else decides for us." Okafor nodded slowly. "Medical bay. I know the duty physician. I can get you 20 minutes. That's enough." "Carter," he stopped her. "If you're right about this, I know. The kind of people who arrange to have a SEAL team killed in a mountain compound in Afghanistan are not the kind of people who accept being exposed quietly. I know that too. You understand what you're walking into." She thought about her father. She thought about the specific version of courage he had described to her once, sitting on the back steps of their house in Virginia when she was 15. The version that wasn't dramatic or loud, but was just the daily choice to do the thing that was right, when the thing that was right was also the thing that was costly. He had called it the long kind of brave, the kind that didn't look like anything from the outside. "I understand it," she said. "That's why I'm still walking." Rachel Morgan was awake when Megan arrived at the medical bay. She was sitting up in the bed with an IV in her arm and a cup of something warm in her hands, and the moment she saw Megan come through the door, she set the cup down and her posture changed, became more focused, the way a person's posture changed when they understood that what was happening was not a courtesy visit. "How long do I have?" Morgan said. Megan stopped. "What?" "How long before the official debrief? Before the people who want this managed quietly get their hands on the narrative?" She looked at Megan with the direct measuring expression that seemed to be her natural state. "You came here before the official channels, which means you know something is wrong. Which means you're working against a clock. So how long?" Megan pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. 20 minutes. Maybe less." Morgan nodded. "Then I'll be direct." She set her hands flat on the blanket, a grounding gesture, the gesture of someone who was about to say something they had been holding for a long time and needed to say quickly. I was not investigating illegal weapons transfers. That was the cover. I was investigating Commander Harlan Voss. The air in the room changed. Megan kept her face still. Tell me. 18 months ago, DIA Defense Intelligence Agency received information suggesting that a senior JSOC officer was facilitating weapons transfers to private military organizations operating in the Afghan-Pakistani border region. The information was credible but thin. They needed someone inside the intelligence analysis framework who could access Voss's operational records without triggering his awareness. She paused. That was me. I spent 8 months building the case. Transaction records, communication logs, equipment manifests. The encrypted hardware your Overwatch found on that ridge, that hardware was purchased through a logistics channel that Voss controls directly. I have the documentation, or I had it. It was on a drive in the compound. Megan felt the pieces clicking into alignment with the cold mechanical precision of a ballistic solution. He knew you were investigating him. He found out 3 weeks before I was taken. Someone in DIA talked. I don't know who. I was supposed to be extracted before he could act on it, but the extraction was compromised. Her voice remained steady, but her hands tightened slightly on the blanket. When Black Ridge moved on me, I understood what it meant. He wasn't trying to stop the investigation. He was trying to eliminate the investigator and the evidence simultaneously. The drive, the documentation you mentioned, is it still in the compound? I don't know. I had it hidden in a location they didn't search, but 11 days is a long time. If they systematically cleared the compound after taking me, it's possible they found it. She paused. But if they didn't, if it's still there, it is the single most important piece of evidence in this case. Without it, what I have is testimony. Voss's lawyers will call it unsubstantiated. With it, it's over for him. Megan made the decision in the space between one breath and the next. The same way she made all real decisions. Where in the compound? Morgan looked at her for a moment. The drive is in the eastern storage structure, underside of the third shelf unit from the north wall. There's a false panel roughly 10 centimeters by 8 centimeters. The drive is behind it in a waterproof casing. That structure was in the compound's eastern sector. Yes, which is the sector Okafor's team breached through. I know. I'm hoping that means some of it is still intact. Megan was already running the timeline. The compound was 60 kilometers from Bagram. Black Ridge would know the extraction had failed. They would either clear the compound or fortify it. Either way, the window for recovering that drive was closing in real time. Hours maybe. Not days. One more thing, Morgan said. The intelligence report for last night's mission. The package your team was given. What about it? Voss didn't write it. He doesn't write intelligence packages directly. He has someone who does it for him. Someone in the intelligence liaison section who has been shaping operational assessments for 18 months. Her eyes held Megan steadily. A woman named Captain Diana Reeves. She was in your debrief room tonight. The intelligence liaison officer who had put her pen down. Who had stopped writing at exactly the moment Mitchell mentioned the communications hardware photographs. Megan felt the cold move through her cleanly. 2 of them, not 1. The door opened. A medical orderly entered, glanced at Megan, and began checking Morgan's IV with the deliberately casual movements of someone who was paying attention to more than the IV. Megan clocked it immediately, was on her feet, and moving toward the door before the orderly had finished pretending not to look at them. I'll be back, she said to Morgan. Morgan's eyes said she understood exactly what that meant, and exactly why Megan was leaving quickly, and didn't waste time on words. Megan was in the corridor in 4 seconds, moving toward the operations building because Mitchell needed to know about Reeves before Reeves had time to understand that Morgan had talked, and she had approximately 6 minutes to make that happen before the official channels caught up with the situation, and everything became bureaucratically complicated in ways that evidence tended not to survive. She found Mitchell exactly where she expected to find him, in the equipment room, where they'd first had a real conversation, sitting on a stool with the photographs from the Ridge Elements communications hardware already organized in a folder in front of him. He looked up when she came through the door and read her expression in about half a second. Talk, he said. She talked. She gave him everything Morgan had told her in fast, compressed language, the way she'd been trained to give situation reports, maximum information, minimum words. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to value about him. The capacity to receive information without filling it with his own reactions before she was done. When she finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Reeves requested the JAG officer." "Yes, I think so." Which means Reeves knew before the debrief that Morgan had survived and might talk. He stood up. "She's been running interference since before we landed. The drive is the key. If we can get back into that compound. That's not something we can authorize ourselves. No, but Okafor can request a follow-on mission based on intelligence gathered during extraction. Credible, documentable with Morgan's testimony as the basis." She met his eyes. "If we go through proper channels, Voss controls the proper channels. If we go around Voss, we need someone above him who is not compromised." "Brigadier General Watts," Mitchell said immediately. "He commands the JSOC element. He and Voss have had friction for 2 years over operational authority. I don't think Watts is involved in this. I think Voss was operating outside Watts's visibility deliberately." "Can you reach Watts directly?" "He owes me a conversation from an operation in 2019 that I haven't collected on yet." He picked up the photograph folder. "I'm going to collect on it now." Megan looked at him. "Mitchell, if Reeves figures out that we're going around Voss, she'll tell him," he said simply. "And then we'll find out exactly how fast he can move to contain this, which will itself be evidence." He almost smiled, which was the first time she had seen anything close to that expression on his face. "Every move he makes to stop us tells us something about what he knows. So let him move." She thought about that for a moment. The cold calculation of it. The way it turned the enemy's own urgency into information. Her father had talked about that too once in a different context. He'd called it using the other person's weight against them. "Okafor," she said. "He needs to know about Reeves. If Reeves is in that debrief room when Okafor presents the photograph evidence." "I'll handle Reeves," said a voice from the doorway. They both turned. It was the JAG officer. The woman from the corner of the debrief room, still in her uniform, standing in the doorway of the equipment room, with a folder of her own under her arm, and an expression that was something Megan hadn't expected to find their resolve. "Captain Daniels," Mitchell said, and his tone indicated he knew her. "Chief Mitchell." She came into the room. "I was requested to attend the debrief by Captain Reeves. She told me the debrief might involve sensitive personnel matters requiring legal oversight." She set her folder on the workbench. "What she didn't anticipate is that I was already aware of the DIA investigation into Commander Voss. Because the DIA investigating officer briefed JAG 6 weeks ago on the status of the case at my request, after I received a tip from a source. I am not going to name that there might be legal exposure for personnel in the JSOC intelligence section." She opened the folder. "I have been preparing documentation for 4 weeks. What Dr. Morgan told you in the medical bay fills in 3 gaps that I needed to close." Megan stared at her. "You were listening. The medical bay's door frame doesn't seal correctly. It never has. Building maintenance issue that nobody ever fixed." She did not apologize for it. "I have what I need. What I need from you is the photographs from the ridge element and a formal statement from Chief Mitchell confirming the equipment identification." She looked at Megan directly. "And I need you to understand that from this moment forward, you are a witness in a federal investigation. Everything you do, everyone you speak to, everything you observe, it matters, legally and permanently." Megan looked at her. At Mitchell. At the folder on the workbench, which represented 4 weeks of quiet preparation by a woman in a corner of a debrief room, pretending to take notes. She thought about the clean intelligence package, about the 3 operators on the ridge, about 11 days for Rachel Morgan, about Voss's face when they came off the helicopter, the half-second calculation, the practiced composure. She thought about her father, who had believed that the long kind of brave was the kind that didn't look like anything from the outside. She had been doing this her entire career, fighting in rooms where the decision had already been made, adjusting, recalculating, finding the angle that wasn't blocked, making the shot that wasn't supposed to be possible from the position she was in. She was still in that position. But for the first time tonight, she was not doing it alone. "Tell me what you need," she said to Captain Daniels. "I need everything," Daniels said. "Starting from the beginning. And I need it now before Reeves understands what's happening." Megan pulled up a stool. She started talking. Captain Daniels worked fast, which was the first thing Megan genuinely liked about her. There was no preamble, no institutional throat-clearing, no careful arrangement of preliminary questions designed to establish rapport before getting to the point. She opened her folder, uncapped a pen, and looked at Megan with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly how much time they didn't have. "Start with the intelligence package," she said. "What specifically told you it was manufactured?" Megan started talking. She walked through it in sequence, the satellite imagery, the patrol timing discrepancy she'd caught on approach, the ridge element's pre-positioned location, the second-wave vehicles that appeared nowhere in the mission briefing. Daniels wrote continuously, not looking up, her handwriting fast and compressed. Mitchell added detail where Megan's vantage point had been limited, filling in what he'd seen from his spotting scope while she was on the rifle. It took 41 minutes. By the time they were done, Daniels had filled 12 pages. She looked up from the final page and said, "The compound, Morgan's Drive. How long before Black Ridge clears it?" Mitchell said, "If they're operating on the assumption that Morgan talked during extraction, which they will assume, they'll clear anything sensitive within 6 hours of the failed ambush. We're currently at hour 4. Daniels set down her pen. 2 hours. "Generous estimate," Mitchell said. "Could be less." Megan had been doing the math since the moment she left Morgan's bedside. 60 kilometers to the compound. Flight time by helicopter approximately 35 minutes. Time on the ground to locate and retrieve the drive, assuming it hadn't been found, roughly 8 to 12 minutes. Return flight 35 minutes. Total roughly 90 minutes, assuming immediate departure. They had no authority to depart. "General Watts," she said to Mitchell. He was already on his feet. "I've been trying to reach him since we started talking. His aide says he's in a call." "What kind of call at 0500? Mitchell looked at her. "The kind someone arranged for him to be in." The cold moved through her again, precise and clarifying. Voss was moving. Not reactively, not scrambling. Moving with the deliberate efficiency of someone who had a contingency plan already built and was now executing it. The JAG request before the debrief. Watts pulled into a call that conveniently occupied him during the window when the debrief information might reach him. Clean, sequential, professional. The same care that had gone into the intelligence package. "Reeves," Daniels said. It wasn't a question. "She's coordinating it." If Reeves has access to Watts's scheduling through the intelligence liaison channel. Megan stopped. Thought. She doesn't need access to his calendar. She just needs to feed him something urgent enough to require his immediate attention. A report. An alert from another theater. Something that looks like it needs to be handled right now. Daniels stood up. "I can reach the Inspector General's office directly. That bypasses Voss and Reeves both, but the IG process takes time we don't have for the compound." "Then we need Watts," Mitchell said. "Or we need someone Watts trusts enough to take an unsolicited call at 0500 in the morning." I was looking at Megan when he said it. She registered the look and understood what it meant, and felt the particular discomfort of a door opening that she hadn't expected to be asked to walk through. "Who do you know?" Mitchell said carefully. "Who has Watts's ear?" She thought about it honestly. The answer was someone she had not spoken to in 14 months. Someone she had specifically avoided mentioning in any context related to this deployment, because involving him complicated things in ways she had not wanted to deal with. But there was a version of this situation where complications were not the problem. Where the problem was a 2-hour window and a drive in a compound and a general who was being deliberately kept occupied by people who knew exactly what they were doing. "My godfather," she said. Mitchell waited. "Retired Major General Philip Carey. He and Watts served together in the 90s. They've stayed close." She paused. "He's the one who told me to apply to the SEAL program. He believed I could do it when most people thought he was indulging a family friend's daughter." "Can you reach him?" "He picks up for me. Always has." She pulled out her personal phone, the one that wasn't on the base network. But if I make this call, it goes on record. Everyone will know I escalated outside channels. Carter, Mitchell said. Everything goes on record from here. That ship sailed when Daniels walked through that door. She looked at Daniels, who met her eyes with an expression of straightforward confirmation. This was already institutional. It was already official. The only question now was which institution moved faster. She dialed. Philip Carey answered on the third ring, which meant he was either awake already or sleeping lightly, and given that it was 0507 local time and roughly 2307 on the East Coast, the latter was more likely. His voice was alert before she finished saying his name. Megan, what happened? Not a question. He knew her well enough to know that a call at this hour was not a social call. She told him. Not everything, not the details that belonged to Daniel's investigation, but enough. The ambush. The intelligence failure. The window on the compound. Watts's unavailability. She was direct and fast, and she did not editorialize because Philip Carey was a man who processed best when given clean information and room to think. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, Watts's personal cell. I'm sending it to this number in 30 seconds. You call him directly. Tell him Philip Carey says the call he's on right now is manufactured, and he needs to take yours instead. He'll believe that. He'll believe it from you if you tell him I said it. James Watts has known me for 30 years. He knows I don't send people to interrupt his calls for anything less than something real. A pause. Is this real, Megan? Yes, sir. Then go. Call me when it's done. He hung up. The number arrived in 28 seconds. She dialed it. Brigadier General James Watts answered on the second ring with the clipped authority of a man who did not give his personal cell number to people who wasted his time. Who is this? Petty Officer Second Class Megan Carter, sir. SEAL Team 6, Overwatch Element, the Bagram extraction operation 6 hours ago. Philip Carey sends his regards and asks you to step off your current call. A pause. Carey sent you. Yes, sir. Hold. She heard him speak to someone brief and firm, the sound of a call being suspended. Then he was back. Carter, talk. She talked. Faster than she'd talked to Daniels, compressed to the absolute essentials because Watts was processing in real time, and she needed him to arrive at the compound problem before the window closed. She told him about the intelligence failure, about Voss, about Reeves, about Morgan's drive. She told him they had approximately 90 minutes before the evidence was gone. When she stopped, Watts said, "Where's Mitchell?" "Standing next to me, sir." "Put him on." She handed the phone to Mitchell, who took it with the smooth ease of a man who had given situation reports to generals before and found it unremarkable. He spoke for approximately 2 minutes, confirming the key details, adding the specific technical information about the communications hardware that Watts evidently asked about. Then Mitchell said, "Yes, sir," and handed the phone back to Megan. Watts said, "I'm authorizing a follow-on mission to the compound under my direct authority. Okafor's element, you and Mitchell on Overwatch departure in 20 minutes. My aide is contacting the flight element now." A pause that was not uncertainty, but emphasis. "Voss is not to know about this until your element is wheels up. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir." Carter. "Sir. Philip Carey has talked about you for years. I'm glad I'm finally getting to see what he was talking about." He disconnected. She lowered the phone and looked at Mitchell, who looked back at her with an expression that was not surprise, but was something adjacent to it, the expression of a man recalibrating a series of assumptions. 20 minutes, she said. He was already moving. The next 19 minutes were controlled chaos, of the specifically military variety. The kind of chaos that had an underlying structure and moved toward a clear objective, even when the surface of it looked like people running in multiple directions simultaneously. Okafor was briefed in 3 minutes and had his element ready in 12. Mitchell had the equipment configured and the photography evidence secured with Daniels before they left. Daniels herself was already on a secure line to the Inspector General's office, her 12 pages of notes in hand, the legal framework of what came next being assembled in the background, while the operational piece executed in the foreground. Megan moved through all of it with the focused efficiency she felt in her best moments. No wasted motion, no second guessing. each step following naturally from the last, the way a good shot followed from proper fundamentals. Her body was tired. She had been awake for 22 hours and had spent several of them on a mountain in the dark, eliminating people who were trying to kill her team. But tiredness was a physical condition, and in Megan's experience, physical conditions were largely negotiable when the stakes were clear. They were very clear. The helicopter lifted at 0531, and in the gray pre-dawn above Bagram, Megan looked down at the base and thought about Voss in his office managing his contingency plan, and about Reeves wherever she was feeding Watts a manufactured urgent situation that had just lost its relevance. She thought about the moment when each of them would understand that the window they thought they were managing had been running on a different clock. Mitchell was beside her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about sequencing," she said. They were very good at it. The intelligence package, the ambush setup, the three-point trap. Watts's call. All sequenced. All designed to control what happened in what order. And sequencing only works until someone changes the starting point. Everything they built was built on the assumption that we walked into that compound last night and didn't come out. She watched the mountain terrain unreeling below. We changed the starting point. Every plan they made built on a foundation that no longer exists. So now they're improvising. And improvisation is where you see what people are actually made of. She looked at him. Voss is good at controlled situations. He builds them carefully. He planned this for months, maybe longer. But right now, he doesn't have a controlled situation. He has Morgan talking Daniels, filing Watts activated, and us in the air. He still has options. He has fewer every minute. The flight was 34 minutes. Mitchell spent most of it on comms coordinating with the element reviewing the compound layout from memory, building a plan for the entry that accounted for what might have changed since the extraction. Megan spent most of it thinking about the drive. The eastern storage structure. Third shelf from the north wall. False panel 10 centimeters by 8. Waterproof casing. 8 to 12 minutes to find it assuming conditions were recoverable. Okafor came back from the forward compartment and crouched beside her. "I've been thinking about what Morgan told you," he said. "The documentation she described. Transaction records, communication logs, equipment manifests. If that's accurate, that's not just evidence against Voss. That implicates a supply chain, multiple people. This goes further than one officer." "I know." "How far do you think it goes?" She thought about that honestly. "I don't know. Morgan spent 8 months building the case and she got as far as connecting Voss to Black Ridge directly. But Black Ridge doesn't acquire military-grade hardware without someone further up the supply chain approving the transactions. Those approvals leave records." She paused. "The drive might tell us more than Morgan knows she has." Okafor absorbed that. "All right," he said. "When we're on the ground, your priority is the drive. My element secures the structure, and you move to the shelf. Whatever else is happening in that compound, the drive comes first." Agreed. He started to move back forward. Then he stopped, looked at her with something direct and deliberate. "Carter, last night when you called the hold before entry, when you told me the compound was staged and recommended we stop." She waited. "In 15 years of operations, I've had maybe 3 or 4 people read a situation that fast from that distance under those conditions." He paused. "My first instinct was to ask for confirmation, to wait for more information. You know why? Because I was the rookie. Yes." He said it plainly without apology, which she respected more than apology would have been. That hesitation cost 4 seconds. Those 4 seconds, if I had decided differently, if I'd told you to wait for more confirmation, and your element had started moving, would have been the difference. He held her gaze. "I'm not going to make that hesitation again. Whatever you call on the ground in the next 60 minutes, I'm moving on it." She looked at him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said, same as he'd said in the debrief. "Just don't miss." He went back forward. They touched down at 0607 on a flat shelf of terrain 2 kilometers from the compound, far enough that the sound of the rotors wouldn't carry. They were on the ground and moving within 90 seconds. Megan counted the time automatically as they covered the distance, 7 minutes on rough terrain, moving fast. Okafor's element in front, She and Mitchell behind the whole group, silent in the specific way of trained operators who had worked together long enough to not need coordination for movement. The compound was not abandoned, which was the first problem. Megan clocked the movement from 400 meters out. A single vehicle near the eastern perimeter. Two figures outside it moving with the purposeful urgency of people who were retrieving things rather than defending things. "They're clearing it," Mitchell said quietly into comms. "Two contacts on the eastern perimeter active retrieval." "How many inside?" Okafor asked. "Unknown. Could be a small rear element." She scanned. "The primary force is gone. Whatever is left is a cleanup crew." "Which means the drive might still be there," Okafor said. "They're collecting what they can find. If Morgan's hiding spot was solid, they may not have reached it yet." "Or they already have it," Megan said. "In which case we need those two contacts and whatever they're carrying. Either way we move." Okafor's voice was decision clean and immediate. "My element takes the contacts at the vehicle. Carter Mitchell, you go straight to the storage structure. North wall, third shelf. Move." They moved. What followed was 3 minutes that would be difficult to recount in any sequential way because they happened too fast and too simultaneously for linear description. Okafor's element hit the vehicle contacts in a controlled takedown that produced two Black Ridge operators on the ground with their hands secured before either one had time to do more than register that something had come at them from the dark. Mitchell held position and covered the structure entry while Megan went through the door. The eastern storage structure was in partial disorder. Shelving units pulled out from the walls, containers opened and scattered, the systematic evidence of a search that had been hurried rather than thorough. Someone had been through here. The question was how thoroughly. She went to the north wall. First shelf unit. Second. Third. The third shelf unit had been pulled partially away from the wall. Her heart rate spiked. She forced it down with 3 deliberate breaths, got behind the unit, ran her hand along the underside of the second shelf from the bottom, which was where Morgan had said, "Third shelf unit, underside of the third shelf." "Wait," she'd said. "Third shelf from the north wall, not third shelf of the unit." She reread the instruction in her memory and moved her hand to the underside of the unit's third individual shelf level. The panel was there, still in place. She pressed it the way you pressed things designed to release under specific pressure, not pushing, but pressing with a sideways component, and it moved, and behind it, her fingers found a smooth, hard object in a waterproof casing, roughly the size of a deck of cards. "Mitchell," she said into comms. "I have it." A half-second of silence, and then Mitchell said with more feeling than she'd ever heard from him, "Get out of there." She was already moving. Outside, the 2 Black Ridge contacts were secured. Okafor's element was on the perimeter. Mitchell had moved to the eastern exit and met her as she came through, and for a single moment they stood face to face in the pre-dawn air, and she held up the drive in its waterproof casing, and he looked at it with the expression of a man who had been in this business long enough to recognize what a piece of evidence could cost and what it could change. "Let's go," he said. They were back on the helicopter at Yo 631. The flight back to Bagram was quieter than the flight out. Megan sat with the drive in her hand and thought about 8 months of Rachel Morgan's work compressed into something small enough to fit in a jacket pocket carried by 2 people, neither of whom had existed in any plan Voss had made. She thought about the clean intelligence package so carefully assembled, and the 3-point ambush on the mountain, and the JAG officer pre-positioned in the debrief room, and all the careful sequential planning that had been built around the certainty that things would go the way they were supposed to go. Things had not gone the way they were supposed to go. Okafor sat down beside her. "When we land," he said, "who gets the drive?" "Daniels," she said immediately. "Nobody else." "Voss will request it through official channels." "Then Daniels's official channels will have to be faster." She called ahead on the secure comms. Daniels answered on the first call, which told Megan she'd been waiting. "We have it," Megan said. The silence on the other end lasted about 1 second. "I'm at the landing pad." When the helicopter touched down at 0649, Captain Daniels was precisely where she said she would be. She accepted the drive with both hands and held it for a moment with the careful attention of someone receiving something they understood the weight of. Then she looked at Megan and said, "I need you to write your formal statement in the next 30 minutes, before anything else happens." "What else is going to happen?" Daniels said. "Voss knows the mission happened. His aide contacted Watts's office 20 minutes ago requesting an urgent meeting." She paused. "He's going to try to get in front of this." "Can he?" "Not with what's on this drive, assuming it's what Morgan described." "It will be," Megan said. "She's been carrying those details in her head for 11 days. She knows exactly what's there." Daniels nodded once. She turned and moved toward the operations building. Megan watched her go and felt the full weight of the last several hours settle onto her, for the first time the accumulated pressure of a night that had started as an extraction and had become something considerably larger and more complicated. Mitchell appeared beside her. "You need to eat something, and you need to sit down for approximately 4 minutes, he said. "Doctor's orders, except I'm not a doctor." She almost laughed. It surprised her when it happened. A short, genuine sound that came from somewhere deeper than the controlled professional surface she'd been operating from for the last 8 hours. 4 minutes. That's all I'm authorizing. Then we have statements to write, and a general to brief, and a commanding officer to watch fall apart in real time, which I have been looking forward to in a way I'm not particularly proud of. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the combination of seriousness and something almost warm that she'd come to understand was as close as Mitchell got to open affection. He had vouched for her before this mission. He had worked beside her through the night. He had moved every time she asked and covered every angle she needed covered, and he had never not once made her feel like she was asking too much or expecting more than she was entitled to. "Mitchell," she said. "Carter, thank you." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father," he said finally. "The thing he taught you. About anger being energy. About saving it for when it matters." "Yes." "What did he say about gratitude?" She thought about it. She could see him on the back steps, the evening light, the way he held his coffee mug with both hands. He said gratitude without action was just sentiment. That the real way to thank someone was to do something worth having been helped with. Mitchell nodded. "Then do something worth having been helped with," he said. "You've started. Don't stop." She kept her eyes level and her face still, and she took the emotion she was feeling and put it exactly where her father had taught her to put things that mattered. Not away, not suppressed, but stored carefully for the right moment. For when it could become something. "Let's go write those statements," she said. "Yes," he said. "Let's go." Inside the operations building in the room, where Daniels had already begun the formal process of dismantling 18 months of deliberate betrayal. Megan Carter sat down at the table and picked up a pen and began at the beginning. She wrote in the same way she shot steadily, deliberately, each word placed where it needed to go. Nothing wasted, nothing. Soft, everything aimed at the specific target of truth. She was 34 minutes into the statement when the door opened. Commander Harlan Voss walked in. He was in full uniform, composed, carrying nothing, which meant he'd come without documentation, which meant he'd come to talk. Behind him, his aide. No one else. No Reeves. The absence of Reeves was itself information. He looked at Megan. He looked at Daniels. He looked at Mitchell. He processed the room the way a trained intelligence officer processed a room, quickly picking out what it told him. And she could see the moment he understood that the drive was not in front of them because it was already secured somewhere he couldn't reach it. He said, "Captain Daniels," a word, privately. Daniels looked up from her folder with an expression of such perfect professional neutrality that it could have been a classroom demonstration of the concept. "This is an active legal proceeding, sir. I'm not able to conduct private conversations with individuals who may be subjects of the investigation." A pause. Very controlled. Very brief. "I'm not a subject. I'm a commanding officer requesting professional courtesy. With respect, sir, your status in this proceeding is not yet formally determined. Until it is, I'm not able to make exceptions." She looked back down at her folder. "You're welcome to remain. You're welcome to have counsel present. Those are your options." He stood still for 3 seconds. Then he looked at Megan directly. Not with the contempt of the briefing room, not with the practiced dismissal, not with any of the layered armoring that rank gave a man who had learned to use it. He looked at her with something that was for the first time straightforwardly honest. Assessment, without the performance of superiority. Megan met it steadily. "Carter," he said. "Sir." He said nothing for the long moment. And then he turned and walked back out the door, and his aide followed him, and the door closed. The room was very quiet. Daniel set down her pen and looked at the door. "He knows," she said. "Yes," Megan said. "He's going to lawyer up within the hour." "Let him." She looked back at her statement. "By the time his lawyers arrive, this will already be filed." She kept writing. Megan finished her statement at 0741. She set the pen down and read it back once, checking not for grammar, but for accuracy, for the specific precision of language that would hold up under the kind of scrutiny it was going to face. Every word had to carry exactly the weight she intended. Every sequence had to reflect exactly what she had observed in the order she had observed it without interpretation or embellishment. Because interpretation was Daniels's job, and embellishment was the thing that gave opposing counsel their first foothold. It was 14 pages. She signed the bottom of each one. Daniels collected them without reading them in front of her, which was its own form of respect. The acknowledgement that Megan had done the work correctly and didn't need to be checked. She added them to the folder that was now thick enough to require both hands. "What happens now?" Megan said. It wasn't quite a question. Now the Inspector General's office takes the lead. The drive goes to forensic analysis. Morgan's testimony gets formally recorded. Mitchell's photographs and statement go into the evidentiary package. Daniel set the folder on the table. And then the process takes as long as the process takes, which is going to feel very slow after everything that happened in the last 8 hours. Weeks, months possibly. These cases move carefully. She looked at Megan steadily. "Voss has counsel now. His lawyer contacted my office 12 minutes ago. He's going to challenge the chain of custody on the drive question. The circumstances of the follow-on mission argue that Watts's authorization was procedurally irregular." Can he make that work? He can make it complicated. That's different from making it work. Daniels closed the folder. The drive is what it is. Either the documentation is there or it isn't. His lawyers can't change what's on it. What about Reeves? A pause. Something crossed Daniel's face that wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived in the same neighborhood. Captain Reeves was escorted to the Inspector General's office 40 minutes ago. She is currently being interviewed. Her access to classified systems has been suspended pending the investigation. She paused again. She asked twice to speak with Commander Voss before the interview. She was told that wasn't possible. Megan absorbed that. Reeves in a room with the IG's investigators. No Voss, no script, no coordinated narrative. 18 months of careful alignment between two people who had managed their story together, and now they were in separate rooms being asked about it separately, and whatever cracks existed in that story were going to show. "The thing about shared lies," Mitchell said from across the room, where he had been sitting quietly since finishing his own statement, "is that they require constant coordination to maintain. The moment you separate the people sharing the lie, it starts to fracture." "How long have you known that?" Megan asked. "Since the third time I watched it happen," he said. "The lie stays solid as long as both people can see each other and adjust in real time. Put a wall between them, and they start guessing at what the other one said. And guessing wrong is the beginning of the end." Reeves would guess. Megan was certain of it. She would try to construct a version of events that protected herself while assuming Voss was doing the same, and whatever she produced would diverge from whatever Voss's lawyers were building, and the divergence would be its own kind of evidence. The drive would be the end of it, but the divergence would be the beginning. General Watts arrived at 0812. He came without his aide, without ceremony, and walked directly to where Megan was sitting with the bearing of a man who had decided exactly what he thought about the last 12 hours and was prepared to say it plainly. He was shorter than she had imagined from the voice. Compact, gray-haired, with the specific physical economy of men who had spent decades understanding that size was not the relevant variable. He looked at her the way Philip Carey looked at her, not assessing whether she was adequate, but acknowledging that she already was. "Petty Officer Carter," he said. General Watts. She started to stand. He waved her back down and pulled up a chair, which was itself a statement. Generals who wanted to establish hierarchy stood. Generals who wanted to have a conversation sat. Philip Carey called me back at 0730, he said. He wanted to know if you'd done what needed doing. What did you tell him? I told him his goddaughter had changed the course of a federal investigation and recovered critical evidence while running on no sleep after a combat extraction, and that he should have told me about her 10 years ago. He set his hands on the table. I also told him that I owe him considerably more than the favor he called in this morning, which he found amusing. She looked at him. What happens to the mission record? The follow-on mission to the compound is officially documented as an intelligence recovery operation authorized under my standing operational orders. It was legal, it was justified, and it produced results. He looked at her steadily. What happens to you depends on what you want to happen. She hadn't expected the question in that form. Sir, you went around your commanding officer. You went around the chain of command. You did it for the right reasons with the right results, but the mechanism is the mechanism. He held her gaze without apology. There are people in this building who are going to argue that regardless of Voss's crimes, your methods were irregular. I want to know before anyone else asks you what you want the answer to that argument to be. She thought about it for exactly the amount of time it deserved. I want the answer to be that when the chain of command is compromised, the obligation to the mission doesn't disappear. It transfers to whoever is still capable of executing it. She paused. I followed my obligation. Watts looked at her for a long moment. That's the right answer, he said. Make sure you say it exactly that way when the review board convenes. There will be a review board. There will be several things. A review board, a commendation hearing, a congressional notification process, once the investigation becomes public, which it will. He stood. You are going to be very busy for several months, Petty Officer Carter, in ways that have nothing to do with being in the field. And after several months, he looked at her with the slight shift in expression that in a less controlled man would have been a smile. After several months, we'll discuss where you want to go next. He nodded once, the deliberate nod of a man concluding something, rather than simply ending a conversation. Well done. He left. Mitchell waited approximately 4 seconds after the door closed before saying, He just told you they're going to promote you. He said we'd discuss where I want to go next. Carter, that's how generals tell you they're going to promote you. She sat with that for a moment. It didn't feel the way she had imagined things feeling if they ever went the way they were going. It felt quieter, more like the resolution of a long calculation than the arrival of something new. As if the destination had always been in the math, and what she'd been doing all along was simply working through the steps. Okafor found her in the corridor outside the operations building at 0900, which was when the adrenaline had finished its long withdrawal, and her body had started communicating its full accounting of the last 31 hours. She was leaning against the wall with her eyes closed and a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk in her hand. She heard his footsteps and recognized the rhythm of them without looking. How's the team? She said. Physically fine, mentally processing. He stopped beside her. Ren asked me this morning whether what happened last night was normal. What did you tell him? I told him absolutely not. I told him that in 15 years of operations, I had never had a night that moved like that one, and that if he thought this was the baseline, he needed to recalibrate his expectations immediately. She opened her eyes and looked at him sideways. Was that reassuring? He seemed to find it reassuring. I think it helped him understand that his feeling of complete disorientation was appropriate rather than personal weakness. He paused. He also asked about you. What about me? He asked how you stayed calm when you were on the ridge, when everything was going wrong simultaneously. He said he was watching your comms discipline, and you sounded the same at minute 30 of an active firefight as you had at minute 3. She thought about how to answer that honestly. Tell him it's not calm, it's focus. They feel the same from the outside, but they're different. Calm is the absence of feeling. Focus is choosing which feeling to act on and setting the others aside until later. Okafor was quiet for a moment. I'll tell him that. Another pause. Carter. After the investigation closes, after whatever review process Watts sets up runs its course, what do you want to do? The question surprised her with its directness and with the fact that she had an answer to it. An answer she hadn't quite articulated to herself before this moment, but that was present as soon as she looked for it. I want to teach. Teach, she said. He looked at her. I want to go back to the training program, the sniper certification course, not as a student. She looked down at the coffee in her hands. There are women in that pipeline right now who are exactly where I was 2 years ago, who are fighting for the right to be evaluated by the same standard as everyone else, who are good enough, who are more than good enough, and are spending energy on the fight that they should be spending on the mission. She paused. I want to be the person who makes that fight shorter for the next one, who changes what the room looks like before she walks into it. Okafor held her gaze for a long moment. You know that's harder than what you did last night. I know. Changing institutions is slower than changing a mission. The resistance is less visible, but it's more persistent. And you don't get the clarity of a single target. I know that too. She looked at him directly. My father changed my life in 12 years of conversations on the back steps of a house in Virginia. He didn't change it with any single thing he said. He changed it with all of them in sequence over time. She paused. I know what slow change looks like from the inside. I know how it feels when it's working, even when you can't see it yet. Okafor said nothing for a moment. Then he said, when you go back to the training program, I want to send you someone. Who? Corporal James Wren. He asked me this morning whether he could request assignment to a training role in 2 years when his current contract comes up. He paused. He said he wanted to learn from the best sniper he'd ever worked with. She looked at him, and this time she let something show in her face that she normally kept contained, not because she'd decided to perform emotion, but because it came up before she could stop it. The particular feeling of being seen accurately by someone who was not obligated to see you at all. Tell him yes, she said. Something happened at 1100 that none of them had anticipated. Rachel Morgan walked into the operations building on her own IV-removed hospital gown, traded for borrowed clothes, and asked for Megan by name at the front desk. She was escorted back to the room where Megan was completing a secondary review of her statement with Daniels, and when she came through the door, she was carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who has had 5 hours of medical monitoring and the first real sleep in 11 days, and has come out of it with something important to say. She set the tablet on the table. On the screen was a document Megan didn't immediately recognize, dense with financial data transaction codes, date stamps. The drive, Morgan said, looking at Daniels. Have your forensics team accessed it yet? They're working on it now, Daniels said. There are 18 files on that drive. The one marked Protocol 7 is the most important. I need you to know what you're looking at when you open it. She sat down without being invited, which told Megan everything about the state Morgan was operating from. Not arrogant, but past the point of performing social convention when there were more important things. Protocol 7 contains transaction records for weapons transfers that go back 4 years. Not one officer, not 2. A network. 7 individuals across 3 different commands, 3 different theaters of operation. The room went still. Megan said Voss is one of 7. Voss was the operational coordinator, the one who managed the Black Ridge relationship directly. But the financial structure of the network runs above him. Morgan looked at her steadily. The reason I was in that compound for 11 days is that the people who arranged my capture needed time to assess what I had and whether I had shared it with anyone before I was taken. She paused. They believed I hadn't. They were trying to decide what to do with me when your team came through the wall. The drive is the entire network, Daniels said slowly. Not just Voss. Every transaction, every communication. 4 years of documentation that I built specifically to be irrefutable. Morgan looked at her hands for a moment. I've been carrying the contents of that drive in my head for 11 days. I know every file. I know every record. If forensics has trouble with the encryption, I can walk them through it. Daniel stood up. I need to make a call. She was already moving the tablet in her hand. Carter Mitchell, stay with Dr. Morgan. Do not let anyone else into this room without my clearance." She was gone. The room was quiet, with the particular quality of quiet that came after large things were said. Megan looked at Morgan, who was sitting very still now, the focused forward energy of the last few minutes settling into something more tired, more human. "You've been protecting that drive for 8 months, Megan said. "Yes." "And 11 days in that compound." "Yes." A pause. "I wasn't afraid they were going to kill me. I was afraid they were going to find someone to tell them what I knew and how much. That was the only thing that frightened me. Not dying. The possibility that the information would die with me and they would go on." "It won't die," Megan said. "It's in a forensics lab right now." Morgan looked at her. "Because of you. Because of a lot of people. Because of you specifically," Morgan said with the firmness of someone who was not going to be talked out of an accurate statement. "I've been debriefed after operations before. I know what the difference looks like between an extraction that goes according to plan and one that gets improvised correctly at the critical moment." Her eyes were direct. "You saw the trap. You called it. And then you spent the rest of the night making sure the people who set the trap didn't get to walk away from it." She paused. "I know how old you are. I know how long you've been doing this. And I want you to understand something from someone who has been in this work for 16 years. What you did last night was not a rookie performance." Megan held her gaze. She thought of the briefing room 2 days ago and what felt like several lifetimes. Voss's folder hitting the table. The specific contempt in his voice when he said the word liability. The practiced ease of a man who had never had to question whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. She thought about what it had cost to stay quiet in that moment. To store the anger where it couldn't leak out and complicate what needed to happen. To arrive at this specific morning with everything she needed intact. Her father had been right. The energy had been there the whole time. She'd just been saving it for when it mattered. "Thank you," she said to Rachel Morgan. And she meant it in the full, unglossy way of genuine gratitude, not as social performance, but as honest acknowledgement between two people who had been in adjacent versions of the same fight, and had both improbably come out the other side of it. What came next took the months that Daniels had predicted. The investigation moved through its institutional phases with the slow, grinding comprehensiveness of a process designed to be impossible to dismiss. The drive yielded everything Morgan had said it would. Protocol 7 laid out the financial architecture of a 7-person network that had been facilitating weapons transfers to private military organizations in 3 theaters for 4 years. The transactions ran to tens of millions of dollars. The weapons included materials that had subsequently shown up at the sites of attacks on American and Allied personnel. That last part was what moved the investigation from significant to historic. Voss's lawyers were aggressive, precise, and ultimately insufficient. The chain of custody on the drive held. Mitchell's photographs of the communications equipment on the ridge led forensic accountants directly to the procurement records that named 3 of the 7 individuals without requiring any testimony at all. Reeves, in the second week of the investigation, made the calculation that partial cooperation was better than none and provided documentation that closed the remaining gaps. Voss submitted a resignation in the 4th month of the investigation. It was not accepted. He was charged. 6 months after the night on the mountain, the formal charges against all 7 individuals were made public. The congressional notification process that Watts had described produced 2 days of closed-session hearings and a classified report that would not be released for 20 years. The unclassified summary described the network in terms that were carefully chosen to convey the full weight of the betrayal without providing operational specifics. Philip Carey called Megan when the charges were announced. He didn't say much. He told her that her father would have been proud, and he said it without the performative weight people sometimes put on statements about dead parents, said it plainly as a fact he was reporting. She thanked him and meant it, and kept the call short, because short was how she handled the things that went deepest. The review board convened in month 5 and ran for 3 sessions. Megan sat in front of 7 senior officers and answered every question they asked with the same precision she had brought to every other element of the preceding months. The question of whether she had acted outside proper channels was addressed directly and at length. She said exactly what she had told Watts she would say, that when the chain of command is compromised, the obligation to the mission transfers to whoever is capable of executing it. The board took 12 days to reach its conclusions. The conclusions were significant. Megan's actions on the night of the operation and in the subsequent recovery mission were formally designated as performed in accordance with her obligations under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, given the verified compromise of the operational command structure. The designation meant her record reflected what had happened accurately without the institutional softening that would have made it easier for future Voss-shaped people to dismiss. There was also a commendation, the kind with formal language and signatures, and a ceremony that Megan stood through with the composed stillness she brought to everything she was required to stand still through. Watts presented it. Okafor was there, and Mitchell and Wren, who was trying to look professional and mostly succeeding. Megan shook Watts's hand and thanked him correctly, and tucked the commendation under her arm, and did not feel the way she had expected to feel, because she had learned over the previous months that the feelings she had expected to have were mostly calibrated to a version of validation that came from other people, and what she was actually feeling was something that came from herself, and therefore had a different quality. Quieter, steadier, more like knowing than like being told. Mitchell found her afterward outside the building in the specific way he had found her in equipment rooms and corridors throughout the preceding months, without announcement, without ceremony, simply present. "How does it feel?" he said. "Correct," she said. "It feels correct." He nodded. "That's the right word for it. My father would have said it feels like having done the work." She paused. "Not the work being recognized, the work having been done. Those are different feelings." "Yes," Mitchell said. "They are." She looked at him. "The training assignment comes through next month, the certification program." "I know. Watts told me." He paused. "I put in a request to act as a technical advisor to the program for the first 6 months, if they'll have me." She looked at him for a long moment. "You'd do that." "I already did it. The paperwork submitted." He met her eyes directly. "You know what I saw on that ridge that night. You know what I heard on those comms. I've been in this work for 22 years. What I saw on that ridge, I want to be part of making sure more people can do what you did. Not by teaching them to shoot the way you shoot, by teaching them the way you think." She absorbed that, stored it, in the place where she kept the things that mattered too much for immediate processing. "It won't be easy," she said. "The resistance in the training program is going to look different from Voss. It won't be someone slamming a folder on a table. It'll be 1,000 small things. Syllabus decisions, evaluation standards, the way language gets used in assessment documents. 100 ways the institution unconsciously shapes who gets through and who doesn't." "I know," he said. "It'll take years." "I know that too, and at the end of it, we might not see the full result. We might just be laying groundwork for someone 10 years from now to build on." Mitchell looked at her with the expression she had come to understand was his version of certainty. Not loud, not demonstrative, but so deeply settled that it required no performance. "Your father," he said, "spent 12 years in conversations on a back porch in Virginia, and the result is standing in front of me right now." He paused. "Groundwork is enough. Groundwork is everything." She had nothing to say to that. Not because she disagreed, but because it was the truest thing anyone had said to her in a very long time, and truth of that quality didn't need a response. It needed to be held. She held it. 3 weeks later, Megan Carter walked into the sniper certification training program at Dam Neck, Virginia, not as a student fighting to prove she deserved to be there, but as an instructor. She was 28 years old. She was the youngest certified SEAL sniper instructor in the program's history. She was the first woman. The students in her first class were 12 men and 3 women. The women were in the back row when she walked in, arranged in the specific configuration of people who had learned to take up less space than they occupied, who had learned to be exceptional quietly because quiet was safer than visible. She had sat in that back row. She knew exactly what it felt like. She looked at the room. She set her materials on the instructor's desk. She stood in front of her first class of students, and she said without preamble and without performance, "My name is Petty Officer First Class Megan Carter. 6 months ago, on a mountain in northern Afghanistan, 20 armed enemies spent the night looking for me. They never found me. I'm going to spend the next 16 weeks teaching you why and how to do it yourself." She paused, looked at the back row. "Move to the front," she said. "All of you. We don't sit in the back in this class. That's the first thing I need you to understand." They moved, and Megan Carter began the longer work, the slow and necessary and permanent kind, the kind that didn't end in a single night on a mountain, but continued in classrooms and ranges, and the accumulated weight of individual moments in which one person helped another understand what they were actually capable of. Her father had called it the long kind of brave, the kind that didn't look like anything from the outside. She had never understood him more completely than she did right now. 20 enemies had tried to find her on that mountain and failed. One institution had tried to reduce her to a liability and failed. One commanding officer had tried to remove her from a room she had already earned the right to stand in and failed. None of them had understood the fundamental thing about Megan Carter, the thing that her father had built into her one conversation at a time, over a childhood and an adolescence, and 3 years of training and 28 years of being exactly who she was. You could not stop someone who was willing to do the long work. You could slow them. You could complicate them. You could make them fight for every inch. But you could not stop them. She was proof of that. She had always been proof of that. She stood in front of her